Have you written hundreds, if not thousands, of poems? Have you never, ever written a poem before? No matter what your experience is with writing poetry, you are welcome to join us for today's Your Library at Home program. For this poetry workshop, we will be going over 3 different poetry forms. The first form primarily uses the sense of sight, and is called a blackout poem. The second form primarily uses our sense of sound, and it is called a Blitz Poem. And our third and final form will be a journey poem, which uses all of our 5 senses in a really fun way. So we'll go over each of the forms together. I encourage you to find your comfiest writing spot, get settled in, and get ready to start writing some poems. Now, as you get settled in to write, I'd like to introduce myself as well. My name is Mr. Aron. I'm a library associate at Gale Borden Library and the coordinator of the library's Writing Club program for 3rd graders and up. I'd like to give a shout out to those writers because they're the ones who really inspired me to make this video today. They've taught me that writing isn't just a craft that you work super hard at. It's also a form of play and collaboration and exploration, and it's a social experience too. So I definitely would encourage you to play around with the different forms that we'll be using today and to share your writing with those who you are comfortable with. Welcome everybody to our very first poetry form. For this form, we'll be giving you a nice bird's eye view so you can see every step of the writing process. And we'll be working together to create what is called a blackout poem. For a blackout poem, what you're essentially doing is taking another person's words and making a poem out of them by blacking out all of the words that you don't need. For this writing exercise, first and foremost, we'll be using our sense of sight in order to create a blackout poem out of other people's words. Now, my go-to for this writing exercise is newspaper articles. Newspapers are a really great way to get a lot of words that you can work with and to create a poem out of an article that was never meant to be a poem in the first place. I will be using the travel section of the Chicago Tribune from January 12th, 2020 in order to create a poem out of an article that I found. Now that we have our article selected, all that we need is some scissors and a black Sharpie or marker. The particular article I chose is an article written by Maya Lau about a restaurant in Peru. As you can see, there is a lot of text to work with in this article. What I'm going to do as my personal writing preference is pick out just a few paragraphs and cut those out in order to narrow down the words that I'll be using for my poem. Now that we have the text that we need, what we'll do is start the process of blacking out the text we don't need. For this part, you have a couple different options depending on your preference. If you're more of a writer who likes to plan, you can use a pen or a pencil to block out the words you want to include in your poem. So for example, this poem, I really like the word refuge. I really want that to be my first word of the poem. So what I can do is put a little box around it, just like this, and go from there and keep picking words out. Now, if you are not a planner, if you just like to see where the river takes you, you are welcome to just take your Sharpie and black things out as you go. Again, it's totally up to you and your writing preference. You can either box the words you want while you write, or you can just dive right in and start blacking things out with Sharpie. Now, I am definitely more of a planner than an improviser for this particular poetry form. So what I'll be doing is taking my pen, boxing in all the words that I need, and then I'll be taking my marker and blacking out all the words I don't need. I'll also be going at super speed for this portion of the video, but I encourage you to take your own poem at your own pace. Phew, that was exhausting going at super speed for that blackout poem. Now that we have our words all picked out, I'm going to do a quick poetry reading of the poem that I've made, and we'll go over some extra steps that you can do to really make your poem stand out. For this poem, I'm going to title it Refuge, since that was the word that inspired the rest of the poem, and we'll get right to reading. Refuge in the mountains. She led us past fields of flowers, and we watched the earth, a small field framed by the green slopes of the valley, deep-hued, purple, and hungry to return, unaware of the world we had just experienced. Now, since blackout poems are such a visual poetry form, an extra step that we can do is color our poem. We've been using black Sharpie up to this point, but I'm going to pull out a couple of markers. I'm going to use green and purple since these colors were used in the actual poem. I'm just going to draw some little vines along the side and make use of that white space that we have. Again, this is a totally optional step, but it's something that I like to incorporate since I really was inspired by the colors that came out of this poem. Now, I know I said I was wiped out from traveling at super speed, but I am going to kick it into high gear and put it into super speed again for this portion of the video. So now that we're back in normal time, what we'll be doing is finding a background for our poem as an extra optional step. Now, a background can be something as simple as a white sheet of paper or a piece of construction paper. What I would like to do for this particular poem is take the pieces of my poem and glue them on to the original article. So to wrap things up with our blackout poem, we can see exactly where we cut out the article that we used, with the story and the photos provided by Maya Lau, and I put the poem right in the main photo of this article. I have the poem snaking around the restaurant that the article was originally about, and now I can look back to see exactly when the original article was published in order to best remember the roots of this poem. Welcome back, everyone, and welcome to our second poetry form. This form is called a Blitz Poem. The Blitz Poem was created by a gentleman by the name of Robert, and with the Blitz Poem, there are certain words that repeat in a certain pattern. We'll take a look at an example to see how that pattern plays out. Now, something to note is that there are special rules for the last two lines of the poem. Now, normally with a Blitz Poem, there are 50 lines total. Now, I don't know about you, but 50 lines is a lot, especially if it's your first time writing a Blitz Poem. So what we will do instead, for the purposes of this workshop, is write 10 lines total, which is not too bad. We've got this. So here we have an example of a Blitz Poem written by yours truly. So first I'm going to read the actual poem, and then I'm going to show you exactly how the words repeat. So feel free to listen in and try to catch the patterns of repetition in the poem. Dream big, dream bright and blue. Blue as the sky, blue as the ocean breeze. Breeze brings cold, breeze brings storm. Storm howls, storm darkens the sky, sky howls. And here we have color coding to show exactly which words are repeated and in which patterns. You see up here we have the first two lines follow the same first word. So whatever your first word is going to be, you're going to repeat it in the second line of the poem. I picked the word dream, so the second line of the poem is also going to start with dream.
From here, it starts in a pattern of the last word becoming the first word for the next line. So I'll show you how that looks. Dream bright and blue. Blue then becomes the first word of the third line and the fourth line. So from here on out, the words are going to repeat in threes, sort of like a waltz. We have blue, blue, blue. Breeze, breeze, breeze. Storm, storm, storm. And you could see how the last word of these even-numbered lines then starts out the next line in a pattern of repetition. Now you'll see at the end here, this is where the final two lines have a special rule. For the final two lines of the poem, or in this case lines 9 and 10, what you're going to do is take the last word of line 8, use it for line 9, use the last word of line 7 for line 10. And that in itself is the Blitz poem in this abbreviated fashion. If you wanted to go all out for the 50-line poem, all you need to do is continue this pattern of this 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It can be very helpful to color code as you go, whether you write on paper or you write on the computer, or to bold out the words that you need to repeat. I find it helpful to number my lines so I can keep track as well. I know that for any even numbered line, the last word is going to start off the odd number line that follows. So, to show this in its full process, what we'll do is write a Blitz poem right here on this Google Doc. So my first step for the Blitz poem is actually going to be writing out my numbers. Perfect. So now I know exactly how many lines I have to work with. From here, we can pick out a first line. Now, for the Blitz poem, you can write about anything and everything that you would like. For this one, I ended up writing about a storm and blue skies. It doesn't necessarily have to follow a particular theme. It can be as silly and nonsensical as you would like. I tend to like a jumping board for my poems or something to really start it off. For this particular poem, I would like to write a poem about a spider. So, for this poem, we'll think of a first line here. We'll start it off with something simple. Spiders are friends. Then we're going to repeat that first word, spiders. Spiders eat buzzing flies. Alright, so now I have that last word of the even number line. We're going to use that for our next two lines. So you have flies to start it off. Just like that. So let's see. Flies, buzz. Flies make a fuss. So now we have the word fuss. We can use that to start off our next two lines. Fuss over food. Fuss and bustle about my room. We have our next word. The even number line. Use it to start off the next two lines. Room is my safe space. Room is my spider friend's home. And now we have that very special rule for the last two lines. We're going to take our last word of line 8, move it down to line 9. Pop up a line, take the last word of line 7, move it down to line 10. And from there, we are done. So we have spiders are friends, spiders eat buzzing flies, flies buzz, flies make a fuss, fuss over food, Fuss and bustle about my room. Room is my safe space. Room is my spider friend's home. Home space. So with these poems, they don't necessarily have to make sense. They're a fun improvising poem. You can really play around with where the poem leads, just based on word association and wordplay. And again, you are welcome to take it past 10 lines, go to 20, 50, 100 line Blitz poem. It is up to you and what direction your poem takes. I also encourage you, once you practice the rules, feel free to break them a little bit. Play around with the form of the poem, and if the poem is leading you a different direction, don't be afraid to follow that new direction and see where the poem goes. And now we have arrived at our final form, the journey poem. The journey poem was created by yours truly. And the gist of this form is to write a poem about a character's journey. The very open-ended form, and you can interpret the word character however you would like. Character could be a human or an animal, a robot or a zombie, an inanimate object even. Anything that you would put as the character of your story, and the journey they take is totally up to you. You can interpret that word however you would like. I encourage you to let the words and the form itself tell the story of your character, and most importantly, have fun while you write. For my journey poem, what I'm going to do is write a poem about a snake. So when I picture a snake, the first image that comes to my mind is a snake moving through the grass. So I'm going to write that as the starting point of my poem. The snake slithers in the green grass. Actually, let's do glistening grass. Perfect. And now I'm wondering why the snake is going on this journey, why it's moving through the grass. So I'm wondering if the snake might be a little bit hungry. Hungry for a snack. Beware of Danger Noodle. Actually, let's make this all caps. Beware of Danger Noodle. So now we have a line about the snake's journey, and even a reason why the snake is going on this journey. But right now the form isn't really telling the story, it's just a chunk of text. So what I like to do is play around with this form to make it a little more snake-like. So what I think I'll do is move the words out so the poem actually stretches down the page. And when you're writing your journey poems, you don't have to take the form as literally as I'm taking it right now. But I think it can be fun for animal characters in particular to try to make the poem move as they might be moving in their own journeys. There we go. So I like that it is more stretched out like a snake would be, but I think that the snake would be a little more windy as it's moving, rather than in a straight line down the page. So what I'm going to do is actually stretch my words out horizontally, in addition to stretching them out vertically, to make it a little bit more winding for the snake. I'll play around a little bit with the placement of the words, so they wind across the page. Perfect. Now I have a little bit more of a windy form for my snake slithering through the grass. So for your journey poems, I'd encourage you to experiment not only with the words that you use to tell a character's journey, but the way that the lines play out in the poem. Are you writing very short lines? Do they move across the page? Do you write longer lines for your characters? What kind of character is actually moving through the story and at what pace? This form is very open to interpretation. It can be a physical journey or any other type of journey that you might imagine. So I definitely would encourage you to experiment, and I would love to see what you ended up with in the comments.
And that wraps up today's poetry video. Thank you so much for joining us today. I would definitely encourage you to share any poems or pictures or insights that you have in the comment section. I'd also love to hear any ideas you have for future programs as we continue to create programs online. Definitely check out the library's website and Facebook page for program updates. We have a lot of fantastic program presenters doing all sorts of different library programs, so stay tuned, and thanks again for joining us today.